On August 19, 1944, General Alfred Jodl stood in the Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia, reviewing intelligence reports from the crumbling Western Front. The situation seemed clear to him. General George Patton's Third Army had advanced nearly 400 miles from the Normandy beaches in just 30 days, far exceeding the physical limits of logistics that every German general understood from bitter experience. Jodl calculated the mathematics with meticulous precision. An armored division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily during combat operations. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front across damaged French roads that the Germans themselves had systematically destroyed during their retreat. The calculation was inescapable. Within 48 hours, perhaps 72 at most, Patton's supposedly invincible Third Army would grind to a complete halt, immobilized not by German guns, but by simple physics and the tyranny of extended supply lines. What Jodl did not know was that 125 miles away, 5,900 trucks were already rolling eastward in an endless convoy, their headlights blazing in direct defiance of military doctrine, carrying 12,500 tons of supplies every single day and night. This was the Red Ball Express, a logistics operation so audacious that German military science had deemed it impossible. Within 72 hours, German assumptions would shatter against the reality of American industrial abundance applied to warfare. The impossible supply crisis. That wasn't the story of the Red Ball Express begins with the paradox of Allied success. The massive bombing campaign that preceded D-Day had been devastatingly effective, perhaps too effective. The Allies had systematically destroyed the French rail network to prevent German reinforcements from reaching Normandy. This strategy succeeded brilliantly, but it created an unforeseen consequence. The Allies had also demolished the infrastructure they would need to supply their own advancing armies. The Normandy beaches, captured on June 6, 1944, became the sole source of supply for armies pushing eastward. Most critical French ports remained under German control or were too damaged to be immediately useful. The port at Cherbourg fell on June 26th, providing some relief, but the volume of supplies still could not match the consumption rate of armies advancing at unprecedented speeds. General Dwight D. Eisenhower later reflected on this dilemma. "Our spearheads were moving swiftly," he recalled. "The supply service had to catch these with loaded trucks. Every mile doubled the difficulty because the supply truck had always to make a two-way run to the beaches and back in order to deliver another load to the marching troops." By August 1st, when General Patton's Third Army officially became operational, 90 to 95% of all supplies still lay on the beaches, 300 miles behind Army supply dumps. The situation was approaching catastrophe. Each Allied division required 700 to 1,000 tons of supplies daily, depending on combat intensity. Patton's aggressive Third Army, pushing toward the Seine River at speeds that violated every textbook principle of warfare, demanded resources at a rate that exceeded anything in military history. Infantry divisions needed ammunition, medical supplies, food, and water. Armored divisions, with their constant mechanical failures and fuel hunger, were even more demanding. A single Sherman tank consumed half a mile per gallon under optimal road conditions and performed far worse cross-country. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. Enter the Germans' logical certainty. The Wehrmacht's confidence in American logistical failure was grounded in decades of military experience. German generals had pioneered blitzkrieg warfare and understood intimately the constraints of rapid movement. More importantly, they had lived through the consequences of overextended logistics. Operation Barbarossa had taught them hard lessons about the limits of mechanical warfare. When the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, they advanced 500 kilometers before logistics began to collapse. Supply lines stretched to breaking points. Railway gauge differences between European and Russian rails created massive bottlenecks. Horses still provided 80% of German military transport, and no horse could match the speed of panzer spearheads. As the German advance continued, trucks broke down on primitive Russian roads. Spare parts became scarce. Fuel ran short, and ammunition failed to reach forward units. The Wehrmacht understood that armies could not advance indefinitely without fundamental logistics infrastructure. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, who would command the 47th Panzer Corps by September 1944, had written in July, "The Americans face the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes a disadvantage. Machines require fuel, ammunition, and parts. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next: paralysis." General Kurt Liebenstein, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, reported from his observation post, "The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension, yet it's not military science. It's mass production applied to warfare." German logistics specialists captured American documents describing consumption rates and calculated from the figures that Patton's advance could not possibly continue. Even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they assuredly did not, perfect roads everywhere, which France did not provide, and absolutely no mechanical failures, which was physically impossible, they still could not sustain Patton's advance more than another 48 hours. Physical laws could not be violated, not even by American industry. The impossible solution. On August 25, 1944, at 2 p.m., in a requisitioned French chateau near Dreux, Lieutenant Colonel Lorena Wares of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of skeptical officers. The mission was stark, and the challenges immense. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in history. Traditional supply methods, railway transport, scheduled convoys, depot-to-depot distribution, had completely collapsed under the strain. The first trucks arrived loaded with 105 mm artillery ammunition bound for Patton's guns at Melun, 300 miles to the east. The solution, conceived during an intense 36-hour brainstorming session, was revolutionary in its violation of military doctrine. They would create two parallel one-way highways, one reserved exclusively for loaded trucks moving forward, another for empty trucks returning. operations would continue 24 hours daily with headlights blazing, abandoning all blackout discipline that military caution demanded. No stopping except for fuel and mechanical emergencies. Military police checkpoints would remove any vehicle unable to maintain minimum speed. Convoys would depart every 5 minutes. The target, 12,500 tons of supplies delivered daily to forward units. The name came from railway terminology. A red ball freight was an express shipment that took absolute priority over all other traffic. The Red Ball Express would operate on identical principles: absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions, no variation from the mission. Brigadier General Hewitt G. Plank, who implemented the system, declared with the kind of audacity that characterized American military improvisation, "Let it never be said that a lack of supplies stopped Patton when the Germans couldn't." The miracle of American abundance. The demographic composition of the Red Ball Express revealed fundamental differences between American and German warfare philosophy. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate the route, approximately 75% were African American soldiers. In a still segregated army, these men who could not eat in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America found themselves at the center of the most critical military operation in Europe. These soldiers, denied equal citizenship rights and full participation in combat roles, became the driving force literally of American victory. The operation began on August 25, 1944, with 67 truck companies and 3,300 trucks, carrying 4,482 tons of supplies on the initial 125-mile run from Cherbourg to Chartres. Just 4 days later, the Red Ball Express had expanded to 132 truck companies operating 5,958 vehicles. The primary vehicle was the GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, affectionately nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, or Jimmy. General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these vehicles. By war's end, more trucks than the entire German military possessed of all types combined. The trucks themselves demonstrated American mass production philosophy. Each featured all-wheel drive as standard, not exception. They had automatic tire inflation systems that maintained pressure while driving. The engines could run on low-quality fuel without modification. Heaters actually functioned in winter conditions. Where German vehicles represented engineering perfection with limited production numbers, American vehicles represented engineering adequacy with unlimited production. The calculation proved devastating. When a German truck broke down, mechanics tried to repair it because replacement vehicles were scarce. When an American truck broke down, mechanics often simply pushed it aside and continued. More trucks were on the way from American factories. Red Ball Express drivers developed their own culture within hours of the operation beginning. They painted slogans on truck doors: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They created their own traffic rules. Slower vehicles pulled off immediately. Mechanical failures meant the truck got pushed into ditches. Any vehicle unable to maintain 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units reported something unprecedented to their commanders. Units from Army Group B radioed. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all military precaution. This violated everything German doctrine taught. Headlights at night invited air attack. Continuous columns without spacing presented perfect artillery targets. A single disabled truck could halt an entire convoy if procedures were followed. Yet the Americans seemed utterly unconcerned. The reason was simple. They had more trucks. If the Luftwaffe destroyed 1,000 trucks, they would replace them within a week. They would simply overwhelm losses through volume, the principle that would eventually define American strategic doctrine. The numbers that defied German calculation. The statistics achieved by the Red Ball Express in its first week defied German calculations about what was logistically possible. From August 25th to August 31st, the operation delivered 89,939 tons of supplies. The daily average was 12,848 tons. The round-trip distance was 686 miles. 5,958 trucks were making 1.5 trips daily. The operation consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel just to transport fuel and supplies. German logistics specialists who reviewed these captured American documents initially dismissed them as propaganda. The numbers were simply too large to represent reality. But the numbers were absolutely real and accelerating. By September 5, 1944, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that seemed impossible to German logistics officers who still relied on horse packs for 80% of their transport. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus. Each average convoy consisted of 67 vehicles. Trucks carried 5 tons of cargo as standard, 7 tons frequently from overloading. The time to cover 350 miles one way averaged 14 hours. Turnaround time at each end consumed 2 hours. Any given moment saw 5,000 vehicles in motion. The operation generated innovations hourly as drivers and mechanics solved problems that German military science considered insurmountable. When trucks broke down, approximately 1,800 daily mobile maintenance units repaired them roadside or cannibalized parts. Mechanics developed a triage system, 15 minutes to fix or push the vehicle into a ditch. Engines were replaced in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. Tire changes happened with assembly line efficiency. When designated routes became congested, drivers simply created alternate paths. They commandeered French buses to move personnel and free trucks for cargo. They borrowed German vehicles, painted them olive drab, and pressed them into service. They built bypasses around destroyed bridges using rubble from bombed buildings as roadbeds. The operation generated a kind of organized chaos that worked. A bridge at Mons had been destroyed by German engineers specifically to halt American logistics. The Wehrmacht calculated its replacement would require 6 weeks minimum. American engineers built a temporary bridge in 14 hours. Red Ball convoys detoured only 8 miles on hastily bulldozed bypass roads created by exhausted engineers working around the clock. German military science encounters, American industrial abundance. The German analysis of the Red Ball Express became increasingly desperate as the operation proved sustainable. A September 5th intelligence report compiled observations that German military science could not explain. Americans wasted vehicles prodigiously, abandoning damaged trucks rather than investing labor to repair them. Drivers operated on stimulants for days, violating every principle of personnel management. No camouflage discipline made the entire system vulnerable to air attack, yet that attack never materialized. Mechanical failure rates of 30% daily, simply overwhelmed by sheer redundancy. Fuel consumption that would bankrupt any European military barely dented American supply. Field Marshal Walter Model, observing the Red Ball Express, expressed despair in language that revealed complete defeat. If these reports are accurate, we face not a superior army, but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they don't fear us. They waste resources because they have infinite resources. We cannot defeat this with military tactics. The psychological impact on German forces was devastating. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear American trucks all night, every night, endless motors and endless convoys. They had 3 rounds per rifle, while Americans were bringing millions of rounds. The sound itself became psychological warfare. German prisoners forced to work on Red Ball operations reported the impact on their own morale. Captain Hans Fontluck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told interrogators, "We knew we'd lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule. You waste fuel, abandon vehicles, exhaust drivers, yet succeed through sheer volume. You've industrialized warfare beyond our comprehension." The German army attempted to calculate the quantity of vehicles being supplied. Every photograph from aerial reconnaissance showed American vehicles multiplying. Every captured document revealed consumption rates that exceeded German theoretical calculations. The Germans were watching their worldview collapse, truck by truck, day by day. Operation PLUTO, fuel from beneath the sea. Beyond the Red Ball Express itself, the Americans implemented another logistics solution that Germans deemed impossible. Operation PLUTO, pipelines under the ocean. By September 1944, massive pipelines laid across the English Channel floor were delivering fuel directly to French ports. The project was so secret that German intelligence never detected it. Fuel flowed through underwater pipes from British refineries, pumping stations disguised as ordinary buildings, ice cream parlors, garages, and bungalows that still exist today. By the operation's peak, around 4 million liters of fuel flowed daily across the channel. The Luftwaffe at its peak had managed 300 tons of supplies delivered to Stalingrad daily and considered that a maximum effort. The Americans simply ordered transport aircraft to conduct supply runs. On September 16, 1944, German observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons by air. The Americans used C-4-7 transport aircraft like trucks, unconcerned about losses, simply overwhelming them with numbers. General Major Walter Weltmont observed from aerial reconnaissance photographs, "The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire strategic reserves. They burn more gasoline, moving gasoline, than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war as we understand it. It's industrial overflow." The drivers, mostly black Americans, proving Nazi racial theory wrong. The Red Ball Express drivers, predominantly African Americans, understood something German racial theorists could not comprehend. Every mile driven proved Hitler wrong. Every ton delivered demonstrated that Nazi ideology was not merely immoral, but factually false. These soldiers, denied basic human dignity in their own country, understood they were making history. They were proving that race had nothing to do with capability, determination, or courage. One veteran recalled the motto that swept through Red Ball operations: "Tout de suite, immediately, right now." The phrase captured the culture that emerged. General George S. Patton, whose armies were supplied by the Red Ball Express, summarized the driver culture. "The truck drivers wanted us to eat, sleep, and drive, but mostly drive." Drivers operated for 72 straight hours, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine. Accidents killed approximately 300 drivers during the Red Ball's operational period. Yet morale remained extraordinarily high. These men were defeating racism through superior performance. Some German prisoners forced to load Red Ball trucks as laborers found their worldview shattered. They encountered African American sergeants who calculated weight distributions faster than German engineers, spoke better English than German instructors, and treated prisoners fairly despite everything Nazi propaganda had claimed about racial behavior. One white American soldier at the 1994 Red Ball Express commemoration remembered an African American unit attempting to pass a convoy of white drivers. What ensued was a game of chicken, with both convoys refusing to yield until the white drivers swerved. But such incidents were rare. Most white Americans who served with the Red Ball recognized its essential contribution. An armored division commander credited the black drivers with allowing his tankers to refuel and rearm while fighting. "They delivered gas under constant fire," he said. "Damned if I'd want their job. They have what it takes." The physical toll and the casualties of supply. The Red Ball Express required infrastructure construction that German engineers deemed impossible to complete during combat. Engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, established 26 maintenance stations, and constructed 8 temporary cities for drivers, all while the operation was running continuously. The ammunition supply rates exceeded German theoretical calculations. During the reduction of Metz fortifications in September 1944, the DX Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every round, plus 20% surplus. German artillery defending Metz was rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity was overwhelming. The vehicles themselves were consumed at rates that would have paralyzed any other military. By late September, mechanical attrition reached staggering proportions. Average vehicle life was 10,000 miles, compared to the normal 30,000. Daily deadline rate reached 30% of all vehicles. 500 engines were replaced weekly. 10,000 tires consumed weekly. Total vehicles destroyed or abandoned exceeded 5,000. Yet the operation never slowed. American production had anticipated such losses. Ships arrived weekly at French ports carrying hundreds of new trucks. The drivers, however, paid a physical price that German observers could not see. Exhaustion became the operational norm. Drivers operated for extended periods with minimal sleep, pushing themselves and their vehicles beyond normal limits. The combination of mechanical failure, enemy action, weather, and driver fatigue created dangerous conditions. Yet for these men, mostly segregated, denied equal treatment, and barred from combat roles, delivering supplies to forward units became their combat. They accepted discrimination, drove dangerous roads, confronted the enemy, and delivered victory. The German attempt to replicate the impossible. In desperate final attempts to create their own version of the Red Ball Express during the Battle of the Bulge, Germans captured American trucks to form supply lines. Operation Grief, designed to provide logistics for the German offensive, immediately failed. German drivers couldn't maintain American speeds. German mechanics couldn't repair American equipment quickly enough. German fuel supplies couldn't sustain the consumption rates. Most fundamentally, Germans couldn't replicate the American attitude of unlimited resources. Otto, commanding the operation, reported bitterly, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." The winter of 1944 to 1945 provided the Red Ball Express's ultimate test. Freezing rain, snow, and ice should have stopped wheeled transport. German doctrine explicitly stated that wheeled logistics became impossible below negative 10 degrees Celsius. Yet the Red Ball Express continued. Drivers wrapped chains on tires, poured alcohol in radiators, and kept rolling. Speeds dropped from 35 mph to 15 km/h, but tonnage delivery continued. German observers reported ice-covered convoys moving through blizzards that had stopped panzer divisions. The Americans had created a logistics system that functioned regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. It wasn't elegant or efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. The legacy and strategic lessons. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball Express operations for official records. Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. General Friedrich Schulz summarized the final assessment. The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization, thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in days. General Heinz Guderian, father of German armored warfare, offered the most profound analysis. We invented blitzkrieg, but never solved its fundamental limitation: logistics. Americans solved it through industrial excess we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express stand as testament to American industrial warfare. Total cargo delivered 412,193 tons. Total distance covered 122 million ton miles. Trucks employed 5,958, daily average 7,000 peak. Total drivers involved 23,000. Operating days 82. Fuel consumed 57 million gallons. Tires worn out 180,000. Vehicles destroyed over 5,000. Cost approximately $100 million in 1944 currency. German staff officers accustomed to managing scarcity found the $100 million figure incomprehensible, yet Americans considered it bargain. The operation enabled the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Each day of war cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in a single day of shortened conflict. The unexpected consequences for the post-war world. An unforeseen consequence of the Red Ball Express was the revolutionary impact on post-war American logistics. Thousands of drivers returned home with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Ball veterans who applied military logistics to civilian commerce. They had learned in France that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you keep trucks rolling 24 hours, you can move the world. The operation also created pressure for military integration and desegregation. General Eisenhower, visiting Red Ball operations in September 1944, witnessed black drivers who had been at it for 20 hours straight. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded, "The general stood watching. He said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things.'" 3 years later, military desegregation began, influenced partly by the demonstrated capabilities of African Americans in the Red Ball Express. The Final Testament. In his memoirs, General George S. Patton wrote the ultimate tribute. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army doesn't move. Without movement, we don't win. They were black soldiers mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. The ceremony recognized the operation that had been overshadowed by combat operations but proved equally decisive in Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke of their pride in an operation that proved American industrial might and individual determination could overcome any obstacle. When German generals surrendered in May 1945, many specifically cited the Red Ball Express as demonstrating the hopelessness of continued resistance. They had assumed Americans would follow European precedent, conserve resources, advance cautiously, preserve vehicles for long-term deployment. Instead, Americans created a logistics tsunami that drowned German forces in Allied abundance. The operation's success came not from military genius, but from American characteristics Germans never understood: industrial excess, mechanical aptitude, improvisational skill, and, most importantly, the initiative of individual soldiers who made independent decisions that, in the Wehrmacht, would require field marshal approval. The German generals had laughed at American logistics in August 1944. By November 1944, when the Red Ball Express was discontinued, replaced by more efficient rail networks and forward-deployed supply depots, those same generals were signing surrender documents. They had been defeated by 23,000 truck drivers, mostly African Americans, operating 600 trucks on a one-way highway to victory. They had achieved what German military science declared impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should allow, maintained tempo beyond human endurance, and proved that in modern warfare, the side with the most trucks beats the side with the best tactics. The Red Ball Express remains one of military history's most decisive operations, not for its elegance or efficiency, which it entirely lacked, but for what it accomplished. It proved that in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the bravest soldiers or brightest generals, but to the nation that can deliver the most supplies the fastest over the greatest distance. The highways of France still bear its scars: ruts worn by overloaded trucks, hastily repaired bridges, roadsides littered with abandoned vehicles. But the greatest monument to the operation is the speed of Allied victory, the rapid end to European war, and the thousands of lives saved by months of shortened conflict. Amateurs talk tactics. Professionals talk logistics. Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America talking very loudly indeed in the roar of 6,000 engines that never stopped, carrying democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road to victory. The German generals understood this truth only when it was too late. The Red Ball Express had made logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most decisive weapon of the European war.